Dear colleagues, members of the IIPC and fellow web archivists. Web archiving ranks among the most challenging tasks that libraries have tackled in the recent past. While day-to-day operations are centered around technical and legal aspects, we do want to address, in the next days, a variety of aspects surrounding this topic. So, I would like to open this international conference by exploring why web archiving is a central mission of an archiving institution. I might be preaching to the choir as I'm explaining this to a room full of experts on this subject, but it may be worth illustrating these fundamental notions in order to clarify the framework of our discussions in the next days. Websites and documents located on the internet are forming the orientational knowledge which we need in our daily lives. Researchers studying the understanding and self-reflection of our time, be it from a sociological, historical, political, cultural, or any other point of view, will not be able to get around using websites as a primary source of information. I am sure everyone will have to agree that for the outgoing 20th and the beginning of the 21st century, these sources of information have taken the place of the encyclopedia in the 18th century. To avoid any misunderstanding, no, the internet doesn't offer the same framework of structured and verified information as it was the case for the likes of Diderot and d'Alembert. But the importance the internet has attained as a source of information seems to me to be comparable to the most eminent knowledge project of the Enlightenment. Scientific research into the period after 2000 might seem unfeasible, even pointless, without web sources. As Ian Milligan pointed out, and I quote, "Imagine a history of the late 1990s or early 2000s that draws primarily on print newspapers, ignoring the revolution in communications technology that fundamentally affected how people share, interact and leave historical traces behind." End of quote. Therefore, web archiving is a prerequisite not only to historiography of the internet itself, but also to historiography in general. Nevertheless, web archives remain largely an unknown and certainly underused primary source, as Jane Winters pointed out. One reason for this was that we did too little, too late to preserve contents from the web. In addition, the question of access to archived web materials has also become a central issue. Legal limitations as well as technical challenges seem to be the biggest obstacles in this regard. Most institutions still face the paradox that archived versions of non-commercial websites which are freely accessible around the world can only be made available from within the walls of the archiving institution. We might have to try new legal approaches. Let us think outside of the box and demand that the contents of the web should not be subject to a strict interpretation of copyright limitations. Don't get me wrong, copyright should not be eroded, and we should continue to respect the rights of creators. Yet, how do we explain to our users that the page, which was available around the world just weeks, months ago, can now only be accessed in our reading room. If the archiving institutions can't follow the evolution of the services of commercial providers, they will lose the trust and ultimately the legitimacy of the archiving mission in the long run. Even if we leave the legal aspects aside right now, the technical challenges remain, as pointed out by Hale, Blank, and Alexander. I quote, "Confronted with this enormous amount of data, few tools exist to help scholars find information. Furthermore, web pages are not well structured or consistently structured, and it can be extremely difficult to transform them into a format that can be used for large-scale quantitative research. In addition, changes in web page format and changes in content often occur simultaneously." End of quote. I am convinced that this need for structuring information and extracting knowledge from needles in a haystack will also remain a genuine mission for national libraries and archives, since central questions about dating and guaranteeing the authenticity of certain documents, as well as the normalization of data, are among our core skills. At the very least, we have a high appreciation of these problems. Determining the authenticity of a document is one of the most demanding challenges. In times when a state can have a direct influence on the contents of publications, in times when the promotion of research and the forming of opinions is not being applied in the way that is promised by our constitutions, in times when statements and images can be changed within seconds, in times when Facebook and Twitter accounts are blocked. In those times, it is more difficult to make digital publications authentically available compared to how it used to be with print media. I guess we have to explain to the users how and why a website has been changed at a certain point in time. Hale, Blank, and Alexander have drawn attention to these questions in their study on TripAdvisor. It is not only about access itself, but also about the quality of authenticity and the indication of editorial changes. As suggested by Peter Burke in its essay "What is the History of Knowledge?", we have to recognize the absent as part of the knowledge. Burke asserts that histories of knowledge need to include what is generally considered to be its opposite, ignorance. It is critical for historians to understand obstacles to knowledge, conflicts between knowledges, lost knowledges, and the collective rejections of certain kinds of knowledge. To me, this seemed to be an alley worth exploring to determine what archiving the web could mean in the future. These questions are taking center stage because the internet is the battlefield for political and ideological confrontations. For example, tracking the history of changes to a Wikipedia article about occupied territories throughout the world, with all its translations and corrections, is just as important as the collection of websites itself. Matthew S. Weber concludes in his analysis, "The Tumultuous History of News on the Web," and I quote again, "The web is a living history. Changes to the web are a story in and of themselves. The web is also a tool for exploring the nature of change over time." End of quote. Theoretically speaking, this conclusion entails real consequences. In contrast to print media, where we are able to analyze the second or third edition of the same book, web archiving can only be successfully interpreted if we can also provide the user with the skills and technical means to verify authenticity. Unlike commercial providers, national libraries, archives, universities, and other web archiving institutions have the responsibility of depicting archived web materials not only as a direct copy of the original, but as mementos that live in a critical collection. I'm going to conclude these thoughts by considering the point of view of researchers. If websites are going to play a bigger role in studies of humanities, for instance, we will have to face questions beyond access, description, or indexing, and also deal with the changing expertise in research. This is exactly where libraries, archives, and web archiving institutions will have to do their part in providing the right training in digital literacy, especially when we think about extracting and describing samples whose interpretation can have an enormous influence on the results. Students and researchers need to be supported and informed so that these methodological reflections do not become the blind spot of scientific research. The question to consider is not only related to the information present, but we also have to consider why this information could only be found on well-known and well-related pages. Finally, I would like to express how honored I am that the National Library of Luxembourg was entrusted with the organization of this conference together with the International Internet Preservation Consortium. Be it the steering committee, the program committee, the organizing committee, the session chairs, the speakers, workshop organizers, or all the volunteers who have joined the team. The list of people who have contributed to this online event is simply too long to thank all individually. But please allow me to express my special thanks to Olga Holovnya, Robin Saklatvala, and Martin Klein from IIPC for their tremendous work, and Ben Els and Yves Maurer from the National Library in Luxembourg for their strong commitment. All I can say is that it has been an invaluable experience and great pleasure to be working with each and every one of you. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants of this conference for your virtual visit at the National Library of Luxembourg, and I wish you a fruitful exchange of ideas over the next days.